All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the Oracle Inn podcast, episode number 4. My name is Eric. I'm joined by Laquan, Kevin, and a guest today. His name is Garrett Mecca. Garrett, how you doing? You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, my name's Garrett. I don't know. I just wanted to talk about education. It's something have a lot of opinions on, and I'm curious what other people think about it.
Cool. And Q and Kevin, how you guys doing?
Good, man. Long day, but let's get to it.
Get her done.
All right. So when we put a message out through our Facebook pages and asked if anybody was interested in bringing up certain topics that might be relevant to the time that we live in and to get an opinion on it. And Garrett reached out saying that he was interested about education. So Garrett, what is it in particular about education? Or actually, maybe we should kind of bring it into context. What are we talking about when we say education?
Well, I'm mostly talking about public education. Was my thought, but in the greater context, I think education is means to, prepare people for life after school, and I think that society has changed a lot in recent times, and maybe we're doing things not quite in the right way anymore, or at least not as we're not doing things as well as they could be done, especially given how things have changed. So I was thinking education in the context of preparing children and young adults for life after school.
Now, Q, we were talking a little bit earlier that when we think about education and we think about school in particular, there's a historical context to that, and there were some points that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's many facets to education, and to what Garrett's saying as well. But for me, when I look at education or I look at any subject matter, I like to kind of go to the origin of it, because you really don't understand where we are now in society unless we understand, where it came from or what helped shape it. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of go over a couple of things that I've researched over the years and, within a couple of days too as well. So this is the origin of the American education system. This is not the end all be all, but this is some of the research that I've kind of gathered. So Horace Mann, if anybody knows who he is, was an American lawmaker. He visited Prussia, which is modern day Germany. He researches educational methodologies. He was infatuated with the emperor's method of eliminating free thought from his students and designed an education system for Massachusetts, where he resided, directly based off those concepts. The movement quickly spread across America. So Horace Mann, a chief educator, served in the House of Representatives. A bunch of dignitaries from the U.S. went to Prussia to earn their degrees. They were also curious about what was going on. So everybody went out there to grab the degrees. Those who earned degrees in Germany came back to the U.S. to staff all the major universities. By 1900, all the PhDs in the U.S. were trained from Prussia. As the first secretary of the State Board of Education, Horace Mann prompted his new concept: the state is the father of children. And what that means is he felt that it was the state's responsibility to educate the children. In his 10th annual report in 1846, he passed the first state law to make it mandatory for kids to go to school. So kind of just take that in the context of what that meant. All right, so lastly, I want to kind of give you the background of the Prussian education system, because before I get into that, Canada also adopted this too, this model. In the 18th century, the Kingdom of Prussia was among the first countries in the world to introduce free and compulsory education. After the Prussian army was defeated by Napoleon in 1806, it was decided that the reason they lost was because the Prussian soldiers were thinking for themselves in the battlefield instead of taking orders. To make sure this couldn't happen again, they began a new 8-year system of schooling. It provided reading, writing, and arithmetic, as well as duty, discipline, and obedience, respect for authority, and to follow orders. And lastly, over the years, what this education system aimed to do was eliminate critical thinking. So if you kind of think of where we're at right now, It's in a sense, it's an indoctrination system, K through 12. You know, it doesn't necessarily stimulate a lot of creativity, because when they're doing budget cuts, what's the first thing to go? Creative programs. You know, what's left? Sports programs, right? They never really cut the sports programs, but they'll quickly cut anything that's creative for the most part. And so I'll just leave it at that. I just want to kind of provide a little bit of context before we kind of go forward. There's other things I want to say, which I will throughout this podcast, but I definitely wanted to lead off with that.
So, Kevin, earlier you were mentioning something that I was not aware of. So what was this about Oxford University?
Yeah, so Oxford University is older than the Aztecs. It was founded in 1096. Teaching had already started, and it's a full-fledged university by 1249. But the oldest university is India's Nalanda University, which had already been operating for hundreds of years and been burnt down by invaders before Oxford got its act together. So we've had this higher education, you know, kind of Western higher education, I should say, for quite some time in that formal university setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Garrett, how do you bring all this to, you know, to how you see things today? Because I think the history, you know, and it's something that I want to touch up on as well, but I want to contextualize this and what it is that we see and are experiencing today. So how do you see the operation of things today?
Well, I think it's fascinating that Q brought up that historical context, because it already is touching on something that I wanted to talk about, which is, are we teaching the right things? I would say one of the most valuable classes I ever took at any level was at the college level. In my electrical engineering program, I took a digital circuit design class. Specific to that subject, I've never used it in my life. I didn't end up becoming an electrical engineer, and you know, that specific knowledge never mattered to me. But it taught me probably the most valuable skill I've ever got, and that's critical thinking. Being able to look at the whole as a sum of the parts, see how you get from point A to point B, and what all the things have to happen in between. And if you're not getting the result that you want, what needs to change in the middle, how you can manipulate things to get the result you want. So I think it's really interesting that you've already brought up eliminating free thinking, because I think it's almost criminal that logical reasoning, just not you know, like circuit design, but just logical reasoning as a skill, is not taught at any level in just basic, you know, K through 12 education. And that's something I don't understand. I don't understand why that's not a thing, because it's such an incredibly valuable skill, and a depressingly small number of people really are good at logical reasoning.
You know what I think part of the issue too is because in the Common Core standards within high school here in the United States, they do have some standards that actually ask about critical thought. But I think what's interesting and what's kind of important in all of this, which is what I think you're alluding to, which is that we're not seeing much evidence of critical thought. You know, you have people that come out of the K through 12 system and maybe don't go to college. Maybe there's a fair amount of critical thought, but not where you're asking in-depth questions. And I think what's interesting is that if we look at that historical context of education, it started, you know, back during the 1800s on the premise that we're going to teach English, we're going to teach Puritan values, we're going to Americanize Native Americans, Mexican Americans, Chinese Americans, African Americans, and deculturize anything that does not fit within that predominantly Anglican American characteristic. Even Irish Americans, when they first came to the States, were considered to be of equal value in society to freed slaves. So we had the system where historically, and I'll come back to the Irish, they didn't come over with, you know, these Puritan values. They come over with Catholic values. And when our original school system started taking place, it had a big deal with Catholic churches and education that they said, okay, the state is going to sponsor this, schooling mechanism, but we're excluding you guys unless you basically assimilate to our Puritan values. So even if you want to be Catholic or if you're a minority or whatever else it is, you're not allowed to come into the system unless we either assimilate you or, because of, I think of a lot of what else was going on at that time, you'll basically just be removed and taken out of the way. So that has progressively built over the last 1 to 200 years of just slowly, like you guys are saying, you're not trying to allow for free thinking if it directly challenges the very system that's providing, say, this education. And I think contextualizing it into what we're experiencing today is that we're seeing that education is important. It's a great place for knowledge, a great place to have critical thinking. But Garrett, to come back to your point, how is that taking place if we don't see much evidence of that? Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is, I mean, that's the point that you hit. The system is designed. It's working as it's designed. You don't want people questioning what they should be doing, shouldn't be doing when we're breeding consumers, buyers and sellers, right? That's how the foundation of our country is. We're the best business place in the world. We're the richest nation. We're not necessarily the smartest nation. Leave that to the Asians. They're the smart ones. We're just the Americans. We build things and blow stuff up.
I don't know. That's not what the media tells me. I'm pretty sure that we're the smartest nation in the world.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot. So
Whatever.
that's true.
Here's the asterisk though, like they're smart from a technical standpoint, but from like a critical thinking standpoint, if you think about the Asian community and stuff, and I'm not trying to single them out, but they're smart from a technical, like if you think about engineering, things, stuff like that doesn't require a lot of critical thinking, I'm assuming. Garrett, correct me if I'm wrong, but like a lot of things, free thinking, critical things, like I just don't fit sciences and stuff like they're not at the top, like.
No, I was absolutely joking. Like, kind of like we have the best healthcare system in the world, and it's just okay.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, nationalists.
You get to hear, we're number one all the time, but the numbers don't lie. Our biggest, best innovators we import. Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and all, the guys that are really breaking the cutting edge are not, they ain't from around here.
We're the biggest exporter of education. I mean, if you think about it, we export, a lot of people come in, they get this information and they leave and they go back, so.
Yeah. But is that part of globalization, though? Is that where really the U.S. tries to influence the rest of the world, where we basically open up our institutions and, maybe somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point, you are assimilating because we have your name, we have a photo ID, we basically have you now in our system where now we can start to build profiles. So, yeah, we don't mind opening up our doors of education to you. You could take that back to your country if you want to, but we're going to know who you are. We're going to know what you're doing with it, and we're going to find all that out. And that's where, to me, when I started off as an educator, I'm thinking like, yeah, I'm altruistic. I'm all about, knowledge sharing and critical thought. And then I started to look at the mechanisms and I'm like, oh my God, like, what am I getting involved with here?
Yeah. One of the things that people, if you looked closely at colleges, universities, you'd see that the reason we have a lot of, international students coming here to learn and then go back is we actively go try to find them and convince them that our education system is going to help them get a job where they can make a lot of money. And then we charge them outlandish fees for education, right? The tuition for international students is off the damn charts. It's, you look at college being expensive for, me or you or any of us, residents of the state that we're trying to go to a public school in. Yeah, it's expensive. But if you're coming from China or, Saudi Arabia, or, looking at the university we have here, you see a lot of those two different places sending students over. And it's because we can't pay for university with the budget cuts and all that have been going on. without our cash cow, which is the international students. They go over there and actively recruit. It's not an accident. It's not like they're coming here because we're the best. They're coming here because we went over there and sold them on it.
I would be less inclined to think that our education system now is as much a result as some sort of nefariousness than it is just economics. We're living in the middle of the great capitalist experiment, and it's kind of run its course. And I think mostly we see what it's about now, and it didn't work the way that. Well, I'm sure it didn't work the way a lot of people hoped it would, and it worked exactly the way a few other people hoped it would. So, I would be disinclined to think that there's some a more nefarious presence that we want sheeple in our country, and more the people with money know how to make more money, and they're really guiding society in that direction. That would be my opinion on it.
Yeah,
I think go for it.
I was gonna say, I think there's a little bit of both in there. I think you're right on, where there's not the damn Illuminati sitting out there going, oh yeah, we're gonna make them stupid. But there's the damn Illuminati sitting out there saying, how are we gonna make some money on these little these kids?
Yeah.
You definitely have not to point fingers at Republicans, but I will. In the states that budget cuts, they go after education all the time, and then they make stupid people, and stupid people vote Republican. So it's a kind of a positive feedback loop of stupidity that is going to lead us to idiocracy, which is going to be sad because, it's got what plants crave.
Don't we, what I think is interesting though, don't we live in an age and a time where the advent of the internet and I think mobile technology, and Garrett, and I think one of you was also mentioning this, it changes what we need to know, because like the one thing that I try to teach in my classes now is, learn how to do research, but what I care about more is learn how to use the internet. Learn how to find something and then start to follow a trail from where that something came from. Like if you find something on Wikipedia, great, that's a great place to start. Now go to the citation and actually flesh out where it came from, the validity, maybe some more of the details. So that way, whatever knowledge it is that you're gaining is well informed. And I just want to take a moment. I love doing this with words, but when you think about the word inform, break it apart. And it's literally a formation of thought. So try to flesh out as much of that information as possible, so that way, because I think we do need to get more engaged, and that's only going to happen with this plethora of knowledge and information that's essentially for free. But what is education doing with it?
Well, education is teaching us how to use citations to get an A and to fake those citations. Nobody is going to go through and look at Wikipedia and say, oh, Bob Smith wrote that book. I wonder what his historical significance is. Let me go look. And, oh, you know what? He has this great lineage. He's made some awesome points. Nobody's going to do that work. College students who are required to do that work don't do that work. They go to Wikipedia. They go down to the citations. They copy said citations, put it in their paper. The teachers are too lazy to actually go check. Well, maybe not too lazy. They got a lot of damn students to teach, and they can't check them all. But the system that you're talking about is great. It just, we need delicious tidbits of knowledge that come prepackaged for us so that we don't have to work. And that's the problem, is in between the massive book learning and the internet, there's a lot of room to try to find something that actually works. Right now, we're either one or the other. And it's in that middle, I think, that we got to find the path forward. Yeah.
Well, that actually touches on a couple things that I was hoping we'd get to. One is finding the citations. It's teaching you how to, basically go in and cheat. My question would be, is that wrong? I still remember, I love telling this story. In high school, there's this midterm, and the midterm was all matching authors with their works. So basically the whole cheat sheet was the table of contents of this, conglomerate book that we have that, had all of these different works in it. So we're all, before this midterm, studying with the table of contents open. And the teacher starts going around and passing out the test. And as he'd pass out the test, every student would fold their book up and put it in their bag and start taking the test. And I just said, you know what? I'm not going to put this book away until he specifically tells me to put it away. So he walks up to me, he looks down at the book, he looks me in the eye, puts the test right down on top of the book and walks to the next student. So I just take the test off the book. I kind of like give him this look like, is this really what's happening? He finishes passing the tests out, looks me back in the eye and walks into his office. And everybody in the room just looked at me like I was on fire. Like, what is going on? And, but I mean, that was a valuable lesson. Learning, matching the artists, the, authors to their works. Who cares, really, at the end of the day? I learned that I could get the job done maybe in a way that nobody else was looking at. And that to me was a far more valuable lesson. And that's one of the things I have a problem with testing nowadays. Almost all tests are closed book, closed note, can't look at the internet. Why? When I go to my job, my boss doesn't say, hey, did you remember that? Or did you have to look it up? It's not like he docks my pay when I say, no, I Googled it like a normal human being. So I mean, if that's life after school, then what are we doing testing the way we're doing? Like, what value is that? I'm not saying memory isn't a valuable thing to have, but it's certainly a lot less valuable than it was 30, 40 years ago when information was less accessible.
Yeah, until the internet goes down and, Skynet rules and we have to learn how to fix cars by ourselves. There is some value to me in learning some of the stuff, to memorize some of the basics, but not necessarily to go through the testing like you're saying. I look at the things like, everyone talks about, oh, I'll never use that math again. And only, why do I have to learn this? I use math all the time. And it's, I have to look up some of the formulas, but I learned some valuable math. It's, I don't use everything. I'm not doing trigonometry, but it's
yeah. And I'm not saying that not all knowledge that we learn in school isn't valuable. I mean, math is perfect example of something that every single person in the world, maybe not in the world, but most of civilized society needs to understand algebra, because you need to understand how your credit card works. That's something that far too few people understand. But I mean, like when I was in school, I took a lot of math classes. It was rarely equated to money, which is what 90% of math after school is, managing your money, with the exception of some specific professions. But I mean,
yeah, I mean, why not go into math as it relates to balancing checkbooks, taxes, figuring out how to save for retirement? Why not look at the applicable formulas and drive those into the brain? I use a lot of, area and volume and that sort of thing, which none of that's real hard. Eric posted something on Facebook the other day trying to find the area of a square. And I put down a completely correct but useless answer, which is just a formula. But it's, I think there's a lot of good that can be done with having to memorize certain things, but we're doing a piss poor job of picking which things need to be memorized. Because, you take a look at a lot of things and it's memorizing names and dates. And yeah, it's important to hear the stories. I love history class because it's story time. I get to sit back and just story time. And it's, it's great. But if you're like, oh, you don't know what year that war started? No, I don't know that it's going to be relevant. If it is, I'm in trouble. But I understand why the war happened. I understand the repercussions of the war, because that's the takeaway. The specific names and dates and that sort of thing. yeah, I mean, listen to it so you can put it in some context historically. But if that's the test, we're missing out.
Q, what do you think about this?
I mean, my take on it is, for me personally, through my academic journey, to me, it's not necessarily like about the memorization of the material. Like for me, I like to really kind of ingratiate myself into the material. I really like to kind of get in there and figure out why things are happening. Of course, that critical thinking aspect. And I think that's very important. Now, the testing and stuff like that, I mean, I can understand. I mean, it kind of checks if you're paying attention. I think really that's what tests are, to kind of check to see if you are grasping the material. But what Garrett and what Kevin was saying, the things that are really applicable to life aren't being taught at all. How to balance a checkbook, credit card interest rates, credit scores, things of that nature. Unless you take a specific class that really probably isn't part of your core, to get your degree, a lot of people aren't going because they just want to get out of school fast, because you know what, each class costs money, and so a lot of people don't have a lot of money to stay in school just to learn all this other stuff. And it's no emphasis either to teach you life skills. And that's really what we're talking about, life skills, things that after school you understand, that student debt that you have, like how do you manage that? What's the deferment? You have to figure all this stuff out once you get out of school, and
yeah, there's a great quote from Mike Rowe, who talk about maybe a little bit, where he says, "We are lending money we don't have to kids who can't pay it back to train them for jobs that no longer exist." And that's nuts.
When I think about my studies, and I'm looking at the university level, and especially within science education, how it's it's a technical skill set. It's preparing people for jobs in the workplace, so that way you are directly transferring what you learn into a real environment. What's interesting about that is that I think, contextually speaking, there's very little focus on the social dynamic of what's going on around us, about how science applies within that. Crunching numbers, figuring out, your finances and all that is definitely a good trait and skill set. How do we think about that when we start thinking about organizations now managing and financing certain months, and how does that money, and how does that fit into how society operates? We have all these different organizations and institutions, and education's a part of that. And then kind of coming back to, who is the institution? What are their goals? Who does it serve? And, I think kind of what we're all touching on, that's something that I personally would like to see a little bit better. How can we start to heal what's been going on since the colonization of this country? This education is still a part of colonizing. And we have so much social unrest. Technology makes everything really transparent nowadays, that we can't hide from this. We can't run from this. We can't just ignorantly say like, oh, those black people are just being stupid, don't listen to them. Now it's like, no, we just had like 4-hour footage where they just laid out in detail how you screwed them over. So it's not like, it's a whole new dynamic. And that's where I ask the question, what role does education play? Because that dynamic is becoming the norm. And what is that new norm?
But think about it, and I'll just say this: K through 12, and then if you choose to go into secondary education outside of that, you're being taught obedience, to be passive, to be a conformist, and not to create trouble, not to kind of go outside the norm, right? So, and anybody who kind of goes against those doctrines is considered a behavioral problem, right? So anybody who has anything to say or has an opposite mindset of what the system has, you're considered a behavioral problem. Then they just kind of castigate you out there into the public, and you end up selling drugs or whatever. And they're like, well, look at him. He didn't listen. He was a behavioral problem. Look what you're going to end up being if you don't stay within the system. So it's just a way of filtering out people. And just another thing too, I kind of wanted to touch on is how do we heal? I don't think, personally, I don't see how we can heal, right? This is a system. This system has been perfected, over the years, over the decades. How? There's people, at the very top that, this is a 24/7 system. Like, they're looking at all times. And if anything kind of goes outside of the system, like I said before in the last podcast, they're going to bring you back within the boundaries. So the system is designed to be the way to keep people in debt. That's why they don't teach a lot of life skill stuff, because if you start educating people on life skills, you start losing consumers, right? You start losing people who are in debt, people who are slaves to the economy. I don't know, that's just my little take on it.
Yeah, if everyone's a critical thinker and a free thinker and going out there doing art and all that, who's making stuff? Who's building stuff? I think part of Q's point there is right on, which is if we keep the population, always scared and always hungry, they're going to keep working, because they have to. I got to feed myself. I got a place to live. I got to pay for it. Where you start to get some of that abstract thinking going, and you realize, a lot of the smartest people take a look at kind of where things are and go, that's not really the way that it should be going. There's better ways. And yeah, they're like, oh, they don't know anything. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. The problem is, if no one is really taking a look at the system, how are we ever going to make it work correctly? It's working perfectly, but it's not working correctly.
Interesting way to put that.
Well, to play devil's advocate a little bit, first of all, I don't disagree with you that the system is the education is setting people up to be fairly non-critical thinkers and work within certain guidelines and to basically fall in line. But at the same time, isn't that sort of required for society to function? At least to some degree, because not everyone can be a critical thinker. So,
absolutely, and I think that's an important point. Is you need people that aren't going to sit around staring at the clouds dreaming. You need people that understand what it's like to conform to society to the degree that they're not running red lights and murdering people. Trying to get enough civilization kind of skills in there without without going as far as I think that we're talking about they maybe have, where you're conforming all the way. So I think there's a balance there. One of the things that interests me about Mike Rowe is he's the guy from Dirty Jobs. For those that don't know, he was like the voice of all the Ford commercials, and he's a worker guy. He likes to go out and work, and he has a lot of quotes.
He has a lot of great quotes.
Yeah. One of them is, dirt used to be a badge of honor. Dirt used to look like work, but we've scrubbed the dirt off the face of work, and consequently we've created this suspicion of anything that's too dirty. So we take away that element of vocational, carpenters and plumbers, and we start talking about education, especially as we get into the talks about critical thinking and abstract thinking. The people that do the backbone of this country, that keep us in our houses, keeping the toilets flushing and the electricity on, a lot of them are not what you would call critical thinkers, but they're educated in that they're great at what they do. In some cases, they're masters at what they do. But what they do is something a lot dirtier and a lot less sexy than, getting a PhD in philosophy. So it's
interesting that you bring up Mike Rowe, because I remembered I was just looking for the quote. I remember reading something that he had come up with, or it was at least put out on the internet a few months back, and where it was encouraging people basically to do the opposite of what we're talking about here. He said, don't follow your passion. You may be passionate about something, but it doesn't mean you're going to be any good at it. Find something you're good at and do that, and do whatever you're passionate about on the side. Because if everybody follows their passion, society's going to fall apart, because not everybody's going to be good at it at all. So it's funny, because that's almost contrary to what we're talking about here in the don't fall in line mindset. Basically what Mike Rowe is saying there is, no, fall in line. Figure out your place. Figure out the place that you fit best, and fit there.
Yeah, I think at least the way that I like to think, and I may be wrong. I may be romanticizing the man, because he is pretty dreamy. He's got that. I don't know. Dirty Jobs was a good show, but I think really what he's like, he's accepted the system for what it is, and he looks at it and says, you know, guys, we need more public participation in vocation. We need welders, we need plumbers. And he does have a pretty good point where he's saying college isn't the only way to know things. You can be a great plumber and, you know, an artist on the side, but if you just tried to be the artist, then plumbers, you know, all your neighbors' drains would be clogged. So I think he's definitely taken a harder line on it, going to the, you know, hey, learn to be a plumber, learn to be a welder, because we need those people as a society. We need those people. And maybe that's what you're good at, so go do that. But I don't think he really stops. He's not saying don't ever learn more. He's just saying, if you're good at something, go do it, and then, you know, build that safety net first and then go pursue it.
You know, I'm going to jump in here because I think there's something that I'm going to be looking at for my dissertation, and I'm going to be bringing in something that's called integral theory. And within this, I really want to take a look at where our universities and colleges are at right now and how we can bring about this more inclusive model. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And what I'm basically bringing up here, this is one component of it, and this is called the lines of development. And as you can see here, when we think about what is all involved with being a human being, we have cognitive development, interpersonal development, self-identity, morals, values, needs, and aesthetic quality, psychosexual, emotional, and somatic. And there are a few other lines of development that we can include in there as well. But when we start to think about these different facets, these different sides or parts of what it is to be human, what I think is a little concerning, but not necessarily, you know, a bad thing. It just might be where we're at in the sort of progression of all of this. But we focus so much on cognitive development. Garrett, you were mentioning earlier about, you know, having the ability to memorize things and take tests. That's all cognitive development. But what does that mean as far as, you know, say how we're, you know, helping young adults understand morals? Or like in the case of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how is it that you're learning what you need to feel like a fulfilled individual? Do you start with the baseline physiological, you know, making sure I can eat, I have water, I have shelter, so that's good. And then the next level up is safety. Okay, I feel like my job is locked down, I'm feeling security. And then you can start to open yourself up to love and relationships and then self-actualization. So within any one of those lines of development, there's a certain progression that will go from a very basic sort of instinct, impulsive, you know, biological, mechanical component to a full realization and self-actualization of being human. And I think what a lot of our education institutions are missing is that they're focusing on just that cognitive part, because we can plan on that. Those are, you know, like you guys are saying, it'll create workers, it'll add to the dynamic of our economy. And I think what is missing in this whole, you know, component of what we call education is that by leaving out focuses on these other lines of development, we're creating pathologies within society that wind up acting like a disease, where we have, you know, a homeless population, we have racism, we have, you know, police brutality. I mean, the laundry list of things, where if we could focus on how do we better create a full, well-rounded individual, so by the time, you know, these young adults go into the world where, yeah, they can start accumulating debt, they can now vote, their voice has a little bit more weight to it in terms of decision making. How do we round this out so that way we're producing good human beings and not good consumers?
Who gets to decide what's a good human being? That's the scary part, right?
Good question.
And the next question is, what parts of that do you teach in the school, and which parts do you really need to leave at home?
Yeah, that's a big piece that we haven't really touched on. We got a fly flying around my the piece that we really haven't talked about, which is, you know, the vast majority of education, as well as racism and everything else, comes from home. You know, that your parents, well, I mean, my daughter's 13, so I no longer have relevance or knowledge to give. But the vast majority of the education of the youth is, you know, they look at their parents, they listen to their parents, and they go to school. And if, you know, if what mom and dad say is in disagreement with the teacher, you create a conflict within this person where, you know, this thing is driving me batty. You know, you take a look. There may be people that have parents that are Holocaust deniers, let's say, on an extreme kind of example. They go in and they're learning history and they start learning about the Holocaust. You know, what's that kid supposed to do? How do you reconcile those two viewpoints?
You teach them critical thinking. I can't count the number of things my parents told me when I was young, and I grew up and learned, like, oh, my parents really didn't know what they were talking about. I mean, that's adorable that they thought that, but no, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
No, I agree. You know, like for me personally, you know, I had the privilege, you know, I mean, I grew up a military child, so I traveled all my life. You know, I was in Germany, Alaska, Hawaii, you name it, I was there. So I had a different lens that I saw the world through, you know. So when I would see things in school, like I could be open to it. 'Cause I'm like, you know what? I've been exposed to so many different cultures. I can believe what's being said, like in the history books and stuff like that. And I can read a little bit more and kind of find out what's going on versus somebody who kind of grows up in one area. And as Garrett was saying, like, you know, you can have your whole world shaped just from within like your household. And if you don't have any exposure to anybody else or any other concepts or any other cultures, yeah, there will be a conflict when you start seeing stuff, you know, and to what Kevin was saying, so there will be a conflict when you start seeing things, you know, in school. You're like, well, hold on now. And I was taught this. Then what do you mean there was a Holocaust? You know, like, nah, it can't be a Holocaust. Or, you know, we use Africans in America, right? You know, people are always thinking everything's all good. Oh, no, y'all got it good, you know, but then you start hearing about the plights, you know, that people have gone through, then it's hard for you to wrap your head around, like, nah, we can't be this bad. You know, if you see things, you know, in the news right in your face, nah, there has to be another reason, because I just can't believe it could really be this way, you know, because I was taught everything is, you know, everybody has it good. Everybody's equal, you know, nobody's being oppressed. But when you see it, it's hard for you. What's that, cognitive dissonance? You know, it's hard for you to wrap your head around that, you know. So, yeah, it does start from the home, you know, and what your parents allow you to see, you know, extended family, uncles, aunts, whatever, you know, like if nobody's checking anybody on the things that they're putting into your head, you're going to take that as a truth and move forward with it.
Yeah, I don't know how you go to the classroom and teach kids not to believe everything they hear, but that would be an incredibly valuable lesson, because I mean, there's so much misinformation out there. I mean, I had I struggle to call it a debate, more of a lesson on an anti-vax thing with a family member. And, you know, I have a half sister out there, and her mom was a very diehard anti-vax mom. And like, she hasn't been vaccinated and that's terrible for you. And I sent her all this information. It was just like, look, no, I don't know how better to say you're wrong than look at all the scientific studies. Like this isn't even a debate. But she had been told by people she trusted that this was a terrible thing, and there was just no convincing her otherwise. And it's, you know, you get to that point, some people, they have no ability to receive new information and then question the information that they already thought to be true.
See, this is
real quick. Let me chime in on Garrett's point. So you bring up a good point. All right. And so if you think of this the internet, right? Think of that concept. And to what Garrett said, about the people she trusted. So the internet, in a sense, kind of creates factions within society, because you don't have to interact with everybody. You can only interact with the people that share your views, your ideologies, and you can live there because you found a community. So when somebody like Garrett's like, look, here's all the information. Nah, because I have my people over here that's telling me this is true. So I'm not going to believe you because I have a lot of them and I'm going to trust them. Like, they share my mindset. Oh yeah. See, they understand what I'm saying. And that's why a lot of people don't understand. Like, with the internet is a great thing too, but it is divided society into different factions, because you can find a group of people that believe the values and morals that you share. And I don't have to interact with anybody that opposes that, because you know what? F you. I'm just going to stick with them because they get me. So
yeah,
there's no forced interaction for you to kind of have your views compromised or even be objective to the subject matter.
See, this is where I think this is part of the butterfly effect, and meaning that it really comes down to, so say, let's start from the birth of a child. It grows up in a certain environment. In psychology, they call it schema. So you have this identification with your surroundings, and if that identification builds up to the time that you're adult, no matter what it is that those surroundings were, you believe it to be true. You've seen it most of your life if it's within a certain paradigm, and without it being challenged, you have no real way of critically thinking about it. What I think is interesting is that I feel like Yoda, like George Lucas, for whatever reason, when he just dreamt up that character, offers a lot of wisdom, because it's really in the way that we treat people who are fundamentally different than us that really speaks to our own character. So if I'm approaching somebody, say, that ideologically we don't agree with offhand, that doesn't mean that I can't influence that person or that person can influence me. It depends on how I attack them. If I start saying they're stupid, if I start saying that they don't get any of that, a natural human reaction is, all right, see ya, we're done here. Because now I am going to go back to my faction because they get me. I was willing to give this an opportunity, but nope, no. So I feel like we do have something in a human being where you have a small window to actually connect with somebody. I think for some people that window is even a little bit smaller, for some people a little bit wider, but you have that window of opportunity. And I think what we do with that, especially for those that leave just a crack, is just to meet them enough that you're not attacking them, but maybe just bringing about like, hey, this is information that I came across. It seems to make logical sense. Why don't you look at it, and then we'll see if we can't reach consensus. I'm not saying it always goes down ideally like that, but I feel like we don't even get to that stage of deliberation because we're stuck on these first couple steps of, oh, well, you're different, so I'm going to slap a label on you because I'm already going to think that I got you all figured out, and you already think you got me all figured out, so what's the point of this? Without actually connecting with somebody.
I blame Sunday school. Sunday school to me is the root of this. The idea of, guys, okay, I'm going to tell you some shit that makes absolutely no sense, and you're going to believe it wholeheartedly and truthfully. And if anyone ever tells you that you're wrong, that's a bad person.
But does that still exist? I feel like religion's been challenged so often. I don't know if it goes down.
Oh, my Lanta.
It does. I mean, think about it. How can you question education, right? This is guy I follow, his name Brother Polite. But anyway, he says, why can you challenge education? Like, you go to school, you get a degree, but you can never find a job, right? And if enough people can't find a job with a degree, you start to question the school, like, what's going on? Why are these people unemployable? Why is this degree not working? But why can't you challenge, religion? Why can't you? Just like what Kevin was saying, is like, if you don't believe it, then you're bad. Why can I not challenge it? Yeah.
Well, and it's to me, regardless of, well, we know why you can't challenge it, because if you did, it wouldn't exist. But the indoctrination of don't question the adults, the adults are going to steer you the right way, happens from a very young age. Not every kid is in Sunday school, obviously, but there's a lot that are, and I'm going to blame them for everything because it's easier.
I just want to say real quick that the other topic that I brought up to Eric to talk about was religion's role in society.
Oh, I'm waiting for that one.
I would be absolutely fascinated. Although I'm not sure how interesting a conversation would be, because I'm pretty sure just from the snippets I'm getting, we're all pretty much on the same page. So it might just sort of be a, yeah, you are right kind of conversation.
Well, if I may, because I would actually defend religion to an extent. Because
Sensei,
I do
you
think, yeah, thank you. I knew that was going to get put out there at some point during this podcast.
Eric is speaking of Yoda. He look at the man. He's the sensei. He is the leader of this dojo.
I'm in Jedi training. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up, though, is that because if you talk about religion and you talk about Sunday schools, I think religion does play a role, because I think in practice it often falls short of the ideal, because I think a lot of people out there who are diehard Christians, at least in their heart, believe that they are coming from a place of love. I don't think they always express it in the best way. I don't think their judgments have as much evidence as they think it does. But at least it's starting from that place. And that's where, you know, the arguments that I've seen between, and it shouldn't ever be between, just you have hardcore, say, scientists, people that believe in rationality and evidence, and, you know, if it can't be at least objectively looked at, then how is there any real anything to any claim? So the thing about religion, though, that I want to just kind of bring this back to, is that I think a lot of people out there do it for reasons that they do want to be more Christ-like. They want to be more like Jesus. So they follow a certain prescription that says that if you follow these steps, then, you know, you will live that afterlife. In some cases, the current life as well. But to bring a full circle,
you're being generous there, Eric. You're being real generous.
Well, I am being generous because, you know, I know it's all over the place. There are extremist scientists, there are fundamentalist, you know, atheists, and it can go. I think it can go either way. And I think what we need to be mindful of is that even if somebody does come from a religious background, all I care about is, are you judging me? And if you are, I hope you actually have some evidence for that. And then also, you know, what is it about that makes you feel a sense of spirituality? And I think that's something that we all try to get a sense of, whether you're religious or not. So I don't know if religion's necessarily to blame. That's what I'm getting at.
I'm going to reserve my comments in case if we do a subject like this, then great. But
I would love to hold it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to touch it right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said on that subject, and it's best said. I think that's a good one for here pretty soon. When you're looking at the educational system right now, the one thing that, you know, for all 7 people that are watching, or talk to the kids. You know, talk to the kids when you know, seeing my daughter stressed out about the Arizona merit test, like, of all the things in your life that don't matter, this is one. You know, this is how we measure you against other people based off of learning to memorize things. Like,
I would contend that's a good life skill.
Yeah,
because I feel stressed out because I measured about between my coworkers on a fairly regular basis. So while the test itself, maybe, I mean, who cares really? But that putting her in that position, that's actually a pretty good life skill.
Yeah. I guess I'll give you that one. I just wish it wasn't over something that didn't matter. You know,
yeah.
That the lesson is there, but if you're gonna freak out about something important, you know, something that actually does matter. Yeah.
Well, we're all kind of kings of our own little microcosms, you know. Like,
and
I
queens,
work
can't
for a
leave the ladies
small
out.
community college. In the grand scheme of things, what the hell does it matter? But if my, you know, domain server goes down tomorrow, you bet your ass I'm freaking out. So, I mean, but who cares?
Well, so one thing that I did want to touch up on earlier is that if we look at the word education and we look at the Latin derivative from educare, it means to lead out. So when we're talking about education, it's a leading verb. And I think that's where education needs to remind itself of that sometime, instead of just becoming a factory, that it needs to lead in terms of, you know, like we were saying earlier, if you're suppressing creativity, then you're suppressing innovation, and you're suppressing new ways and new ideas of, you know, traditions that maybe are antiquated and they're outdated and obsolete. So how do we how do we push knowledge in a way to get people involved and maybe a little bit more well-rounded?
You'd have to revamp the whole education system. Again, look at it. It had to be revamped from K through 12 all the way through. You'd have to change the whole doctrine, everything. If you want that, I don't think you can just. How would you implement it now though? Like you can't just be like, all right, I'm just gonna put it right here. Like I just feel like the whole philosophy has to change because it just kind of throws everything off. Like it's almost like an assembly line. If you put the wrong thing in there, it's gonna throw everything off. Like you can't just say like, all right, I'm going to 8th and 9th grade, I'm gonna throw it here. You know, I think you have to revamp the whole system. I think you have to kind of build around it. I mean, you're talking about changing ideology, man. I mean, it's the whole mindset.
Are you guys familiar with progressivism? John Dewey in particular?
So, actually, I want to before we get onto that, I want to kind of go back to what Q was just saying, where looking at the entire system, like right now, the only conversation I've heard around what should be taught, shouldn't be taught in schools is a bunch of the red states freaking out about Common Core. That's about the extent of the conversation we're having as to what we should be teaching. You know, the conversation really should be like, I forget who was saying it earlier. What sort of person do we want to create? You know, what is it that this society values? And let's design the system to do that, assuming that what our society values is a good thing and not something evil and terrible, which once again, it's, you know, who decides what is good.
So on that point, that's essentialism, which is also a philosophy of education, is the passing of traditional knowledge, saying that it is essential that we carry on this line, where progressivism says, you know, don't focus so much on, you know, determining what people should learn, but see what the learner is interested in and try to grow and build from there. So I feel it's kind of a double-edged sword, Kevin, when you're saying that, because on the one hand, either way, it's a great power. Either way, I think that power is present. So I feel like we can either influence it that, yes, one way or another, we're trying to create a certain kind of human being. And I think the more that we try to control every bit of that, I think the messier it gets. And that's where I think, well, if we just focus on what is it that a human being needs to think for themselves, to come from a place of love, to not feel defensive, why don't we focus on that and make it, for lack of a better way of saying this, socially shared and transparent. So that way we all know why we're doing this, as opposed to, you know, maybe just having more of a, you know, let's be a world leader in business or economics because it creates riches and wealth and all these factors that, you know, as time continues to push forward, it just doesn't matter. You know, there's no real value in material. To some extent.
There we go. Just want you to be fair.
Got to be fair.
Yeah.
What was it Daniel Tosh was saying about being on a jet ski? He's never seen anybody cry or frown on a jet ski before. Garrett, go ahead.
It's difficult because, I mean, at least in my humble opinion, I think the education system right now is broken to some degree on just about every level. I mean, it's difficult to afford. Teachers don't get paid enough because, I mean, there's really no question in any aspect of society, money gets results. It just does. And education budgets are always being slashed. You know, higher education is becoming more and more out of reach, but maybe arguably less necessary all the time because trade schools are becoming more and more valuable. You know, we're still teaching, for the most part, using the Socratian method. So that's a 4,000-year-old tool that maybe needs to be updated because of society has changed a little bit since then. It's just, I mean, it kind of gets back to what Q was saying. It might be a good time to sort of revamp everything. I mean, we are living in. I've heard a lot of people look back and they, you know, separate human civilization through the kind of the hallmarks of different eras, and they're thinking, you know, the thought pattern now is people in 1,000 years are going to look back at now and call it the information era. It's the time where information is so disgustingly available that it's impossible to absorb it all. So wouldn't now be a really good time to evaluate how we are consuming and distributing that information? And maybe we need to come up with a whole new system of doing it. You know, is sending kids to school the best way anymore? Is that, you know, I don't know, but I'm just saying, like, maybe some really radical ideas now would be a good time for those to flourish.
Or at least have the conversation, right?
Mhm.
You know, why don't we at least talk about, is this working? Because granted, I see headlines that come out of, you know, headlines are sensational, right? They're clickbait. That's the whole goal is, oh, read me. But they're talking about, you know, school is, you know, don't ever start school before 10 a.m. for the youth. Don't ever. So there's like these things going on where they're starting to look at elements of it and saying, hey, maybe 7:30 or 8:30 in the morning isn't when you should be starting if you really want education as a goal. Why not expand that kind of questioning to include the subjects that, you know, that are taught, the life skills that are taught or not taught? I think the biggest step that we can take that is actually able to be taken is to start the conversation.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
And also too, it's the curriculum that's presented to the teacher, right? Because you have to follow that curriculum, and there's only a little bit of, you know, a degree that you can go this way or go that way as well. You know, so that's the biggest thing, because they have to teach that. They have to hit all those wickets before like the class is done, before the child moves on to the next class. Also, there should be a little bit more diversity too. Like, kids need to be able to relate to their teachers as well. That in a sense spawns creativity, that spawns critical thinking too. If you see somebody that you can relate to that understands you, right? Because, and I could be wrong with this, but I know it's kind of close, but I know like majority of teachers across America is like, it's majority women. Like the educational system is majority women, you know, if that is correct. So, and a lot of them are white women. Now this is not like a race thing, but I'm saying like most boys, young boys, whether they're just young, you know, white kids or as minorities, it's kind of hard to relate. And it's kind of hard for a woman, even though it's their maternal instinct, to really relate to that young kid, you know? So sometimes a lot of them have a little bit of energy. They're trying to express a little bit of alphaness, stuff like that. So sometimes there's that block, you know, of the kid trying to really come into their own versus the teacher thinking they're a behavioral issue, you know? So there's just different elements to kind of look at within like the education thing. So what Kevin said, the conversation needs to be started. And again, it needs to be revamped with those points.
76% of public school teachers are female, 44% are under the age 40, and 56% had a master's or higher degree, according to the government. So it's not a slight majority, it's an overwhelming majority. 76%. This data is from 2011, 2012. So I think, yeah, you know, that's a very important point. Look at who the teachers are, what is their worldview, and is there diversity in teaching the teachers? Are they getting enough when they're in school, getting their master's or bachelor's, to really be able to bring a broad, you know, idea of society, of the challenges, the opportunities, all of it? Are they getting that to where they can actually bring it to the classroom, given that that's 76% of the teaching workforce?
Can I give one quick example real quick? Just one quick example. So to that point, like take a manager, a CEO, whatever, right? So when you're in school learning, when you're going through business courses and stuff like that, you know, they teach you the fundamentals of business, how it operates. They teach you personnel management, there's different personnel styles, stuff like that. But they don't teach you what happens when your employee says, I'm not doing that shit, or fuck you. You know what I'm saying? They don't teach you how to handle that. So you kind of revert back to what you know, right? And you kind of hide behind like your title, or, you know, the first thing you're ready to do is fire somebody or whatever. So I say all that to say, like, there should be a little bit more real world experience, you know, that a person should be able to bring, you know, to that classroom or to a, you know, to a position, so you can find out what's going on. So if you do have a kid that's acting out, doing this, you kind of have other tools in your toolbox to to de-escalate the situation instead of send them to the principal's office, send them to ISS, and all of a sudden now this kid has a record. This kid has, you know, a reputation of being disobedient. But you didn't take the time to really get to know this kid or really try to figure out what's going on. And I do understand a lot of teachers have a lot of kids, and you can't take that time to really concentrate on one person. But that is a concept that needs to be talked about a little bit more too as well.
83% of teachers are white.
Yeah, see, I just didn't have the stats, but I knew it. So,
And I think that all relate together because we were talking about what subjects are being taught, and I've wondered about that myself. Like, what core subjects are the most important? I would contend that something like history maybe should be de-emphasized a little bit. I took history every year, all the way through high school, K through 12. I had some form of history class all the way along. I'm not sure how many life skills I got out of that.
History as it's taught now, though. History as it's taught now. Like if they revamped it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not sure that teaching it every year for that long is the most valuable.
Understand. Gotcha.
But that that's would definitely be up for discussion. But like right now, I hire a lot of student workers, and they're all around 18, 20 years old. And I've talked with others. Interpersonal skills is something that that generation, the 18 and 20-year-olds currently really have a hard time with, just dealing with people. And maybe that's something that should be taught in basic education. Maybe logical reasoning should be taught. Some of these things that we pick up as incidental from other things along the way. How much interpersonal skills are you going to learn incidentally from a teacher who has 35 students? That's something that back when they had 15 to 20 students and could really do some one-on-one time, maybe wasn't as much of a problem. But again, now society's changed. Maybe if we could get classroom sizes down, maybe then it wouldn't need to be a class that's taught. But I don't know. It's like you're saying. It's one of those things that it's a problem that needs to be addressed from the ground up.
You make a great point. I shared a TED Talk to my Facebook a couple of days ago. And the funny thing about what you just said, the TED Talk was this lady who's an expert in pretty much interpersonal skills. So she was teaching people ways to interact with other human beings. And that's what the whole TED Talk was, of when you meet a person in the street, what are different ways to kind of go into a conversation, talk about their shoes or talk about this.
I shared that TED Talk on my Facebook too.
Yeah. So, and I said to myself, I was like, we have another human teaching humans how to interact with humans, so that kind of shows you where we are in society. So to your point, it's sad because that is lacking in all facets of education. In college, sometimes you get it depending on the type of university you go to. If it's not a accelerated course you're in or whatever program, but for the most part, how sad is that? Think about it.
That's a life skill being taught in a graduate program. I mean, that everyone should learn that. You shouldn't have to go to college for that. That's something that literally every human being needs.
Kevin, your mic's muted.
I think Eric needs that TED Talk.
Yeah. I was going to say, teaching the interpersonal communication thing, that's hard. We can't measure that on a test. Why? Just because it's useful doesn't mean that, that's the problem, right? The interpersonal communications that we get is from cramming a bunch of kids in a classroom together and saying, all right, kids, be nice. Now go outside and run around and scream for a little bit. Okay, now calm down, sit there and get along. There's not really, psychology and sociology are only used as a way to control the population, right? All right, let's pacify the group so we can get back to learning the things that you're going to be tested on. It's...
You're right that you can't measure. Sorry, go ahead.
No, to that point about measuring. So I want to bring this back up onto the screen because this is where, when I was mentioning earlier that we have these lines of development, and I can tell you right now, and this is something I'm reviewing in my coursework right now, when we think about these different lines of development, and for those of you that might just be joining us, every line that you see is a different aspect of being a human being. So we have cognitive development, moral, emotional, aesthetic, and so on. Within each of these levels of development, you guys are talking about the interpersonal one. So in this case, it would be the second line there. This is what is the biggest challenge in education, which is that interpersonal relationships or emotional development, self-identity, to measure those means you're primarily doing it through a cognitive lens. And if these are distinctly different aspects of a human being, how do you fit or how do you form a metric that can say, oh yeah, clearly Eric emotionally is well developed and has a high level of emotional intelligence, when if I were just given a test, I would basically be asked to respond to my cognitive ability to memorize the correct answer. Doesn't say anything about emotionally where I'm at, where my insecurities are at, how I, have these shadows that creep up and manifest within my relationships. So when I think about those different lines of development, I think that is the challenge of education, which is we want people to grow in several aspects of their lives, but how do you fit a metric around something like that? And that's where, what's that?
You don't have to do a metric. I mean, you know how you do like the college success classes and stuff like that in the beginning? Like there could be things like that. It doesn't really require like a grade, it's just kind of like pass or not, but I don't think you have to actually put a test in front of somebody. I just think that there could be a way it could be taught, or at least concepts put out there. It's just a lot of kids, like I said, this is an internet age. They don't know how to interact with people when they see them in person. So it is a need right now, in some capacity.
Maybe it's just me and I'm old school, but this is where I actually think we need a Starfleet Academy type of idea.
You're halfway there with your jacket, brother.
Well, guys, we are running a little bit over. So, on the topic of education, does anybody have any closing remarks or comments?
The only thing I'll say in closing for myself is I'll kind of revert back to one of the points you make about how we have different factions in the internet and then how people's natural reaction is to kind of back off if they feel attacked. I think a lot of people are married, to their ideologies and to the things they hold true. And so it's things that I've said throughout our different podcasts is that we have to figure out how to disseminate information. If you feel like you have more information than somebody else in a certain aspect, you have to realize, like, how do I feed this person without them feeling, offended or wanting to shut down on me, because again, I always say that at some point, all of us on this panel right here, we were not as conscious or as educated, in the past. We took something in us said, what, I want more for myself and I want to seek knowledge, So again, it really kind of comes back to how do I disseminate this knowledge to somebody that I'm trying to influence or trying to help them see something in a different light. It really kind of takes a little bit of caring, compassion, and empathy. And again, that's still lacking in society, but that was my final point.
Yeah, it'd be great if we could start funding education and actually explore things outside of school. So go do that.
Yeah, I going back, I was talking about the conversation with the anti-vax mom, and I remember when that conversation started, I started typing to her and I said, you know what, I paused and I was like, you know what, this is something I actually don't know a lot about. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to read this article that she just linked to. And I tried to read the whole thing, spelling errors and no punctuation and just no sources whatsoever, just a terribly written piece of material. And then I went, okay, I obviously have my own bias. I've, the people that my little group on the internet has come to a consensus on this. So I want to look outside my group and see if there is any real credible information on the other side of the story. And I looked it up and there was none. So I felt at that point, I turned around and I finished, typing what I was saying to her. But that's a learned skill. And I really, that's something I taught myself after literally years of really focusing on, okay, this other person sitting across from me is saying something I disagree with. I need to listen and see if there's credit to it and if I should change my opinion. I just wish more people would do the same thing.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I thank you all for being here. I kind of learned some little tidbits over this, and I think what we're doing now is the birth of perhaps a very new approach, maybe not brand new, but a new take on education, where we look at the traditional qualities and we see the institutions that is created, but we start to think a little bit about outside of the box, because the social dynamics are just changing more and more every day. So with that, I want to thank you guys for coming on. I want to thank everybody for watching. This is the Oracle In podcast, and we will see everybody next episode.
Later.
Thanks all.